And it's a hot take episode. Bow, meow,
Woo!
meow, meow, meow. It's my air horn.
Yeah, love it.
You guys, if you didn't get the gist from my song just now, it's a hot take episode. This is Smart in Public. I'm Katie Boyson,
And
and
I'm
Duffy
Kate
just took a
Jefferson.
drink. Just took a drink of coffee as I teed.
It's 7:15 in Australia, guys. It's early. Got a coffee.
I'm Katie Boyson, and that's Katie Duffy. I'm in a mood. I'm
I can
ready.
tell you're in a singing mood. I love it.
Oh my gosh,
I'm
I'm
just gonna go
excited for
off
this.
then. If this is your mood and we're doing a hot take, woo!
We've got two hot takes today. One, I will let Duffy lead in, which, actually, scratch it. I'm just going to let you go. I'm not even going to tell
Right.
everyone what the hot takes
You're
are,
going
and we're
to
just going to
you're going to
discover
run.
them. And then I'll
Okay,
create
cool.
like a cheat sheet on social
Yeah,
for
and I
everyone
feel
that.
like we'll just have like a whole bunch of like chilies for how spicy this is gonna get.
Mhm.
Chili emoji time.
Can I be embarrassing? Is this episode going to air on your birthday? When's your birthday?
No, it's on Monday, but thank you for bringing that up.
I knew you would hate
So
it.
this will be after my birthday.
It's your
So
birthday.
yeah, guys, I'm in my last year of my 30s.
It's her last year of her 30s.
Woo! So I'm gonna live it up this year, guys. I'm gonna live it up. But I'm okay with that. I'm really feeling good about where I am in my life. So hey, keep it rolling, you
I
know?
felt like my 30s were good. I feel like my 40s have started out with a bang. You know
Yeah.
what I like to pretend is that I've been born again and now I know all the things that I needed to know. And now I'm a baby, 40-year-old living with much more knowledge.
Okay. Wow. That was very woo-woo. Even for you, that was very woo-woo that you've been born again. And okay, well, cool. Boyson's been born again. She's a baby.
I'm flipping Devasy off on the camera.
We'll put it in there. We'll put it in the circle. Let's get started. All
All
right.
right.
So hot take. I think most people hopefully will have seen this. It's kind of blown up a little bit, but for those that haven't, Diary of a CEO podcast, which love that podcast. Stephen Bartlett, if you haven't listened to it, it's great. They have really good CEOs go on and really wide ranging discussions. He had Emma Grede on this week. Emma Grede is the co-founder of Skims. So I think a lot of people think Skims, think Kim Kardashian, but
Mhm.
Emma is kind of, the CEO, co-founder. She also is part of Good American, which is the one aligned with Khloe Kardashian. So,
Okay.
slightly aligned with the Kardashians, but a businesswoman and entrepreneur in her own right. She's also, I think, part of the Obama Foundation. So a very accomplished woman. She went on the podcast and they had a kind of wide ranging conversation. But the thing that has been pulled out and has created a little bit of what we would call a media storm
A
is
kerfuffle.
a kerfuffle is that she is talking about work-life balance as part of the podcast. And what she said was that basically work-life balance is not the responsibility of the employer, it's the responsibility of the employee.
Mm.
And basically it's on you. And she also kind of took it one step further and was basically saying, if people ask me about work-life balance in an interview scenario, a candidate asks me, like she basically writes them off and is kind of like, what are you doing?
Hmm.
And so that's what she said. There's a bit of other kind of context around it. She kind of talked about, how she's sort of a mum as well. She has 4 kids. She obviously is in a very high pressure role. And so she was kind of in that context saying like, I've had to figure out for myself how to balance ambition with being a mum.
Mhm.
And, so that's kind of where it came from, was talking about that. Now, this has gone gangbusters. It's been on morning TV programs. It's, I've seen articles about it here in Australia. I've seen articles from the US as I did my little deep dive into it. And a lot of women are pretty angry about it. And not just women, but I think women are probably the more vocal part here. And particularly working mums seem to be the ones that are particularly upset about it. Because and actually there's been a few commentaries about sort of younger workers and what younger workers want these days
Mhm.
in terms of their work and their life, and that she is in a position of privilege being a CEO. She also has a lot of money. She didn't go into what help or how she manages that ambition and that work life with her kids. Maybe she has help, maybe she doesn't, but I think people felt like it's a little bit easier to say that at a CEO level than it might be if you're a junior employee.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's gone a bit nuts. And I think there's kind of a couple of interesting things with it for me. One is we're in this really interesting place, I think, where people say one thing on a podcast and it creates this media swirl.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm Diary of a CEO, that's not a bad thing, right? Now everyone's going
Right.
to listen to the podcast. So in some ways, from that perspective, maybe she was trying to be a little bit controversial. Maybe that's sort of part of her brand, trying to push the boundaries. Definitely that podcast is where people open up. Like there's a lot of things that have happened on that podcast where CEOs are quite open, quite vulnerable. That is the style. So I think from a Diary of a CEO point of view, it's not a bad thing. It's directing people to that podcast. I think what's interesting is how quick people have been to sort of tear her down.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes back to, and we've talked about it a bit on the podcast, it feels like we're very quick to kind of really go at women very quickly.
Yeah.
And sort of, she said this thing. A lot of people disagree with it. Some people agree with it. But what seems to have happened immediately is a tear down. She's out of touch. She doesn't know. This is not modern leadership. There's a lot of that commentary. I'll get to kind of my personal views in a minute, but I just think that's an interesting time, and it seems to keep happening in the media, I think.
Yeah.
That these powerful women say something that people maybe don't agree with, and then it kind of becomes this storm. What I'm starting to see now is a bit more nuance in the discussion. People are sort of starting to think about it, talk about it.
Take a breath.
Take a breath, not tear her
Yeah.
down as much. And so maybe we'll see a little bit more of that. But that's kind of what happened. And I just thought it would be an interesting one for us to kind of unpack. Particularly as a working mum, I have perspectives on it, and I've hired people, and I think it's an interesting take. So I'm happy to go into that. But also just from a comms perspective, I think we're in this really interesting time.
Mm-hmm.
These media storms, particularly it feels like against women, is just, I think, something we need to be looking at and being aware of.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because when you're the CEO of such a big company like Skims, I would imagine, particularly as a woman CEO, you wear the weight of that company. And so it could potentially make you, like if she said something like, it's up to you, it probably sounded to her fine, because she's like, I have to deal with that every day. You probably think I'm just, thinking through this. But
Yeah.
if I were in her shoes, I would be thinking, I'm doing this every single day. I'm thinking about what my balance looks like. I'm consciously making an effort to create boundaries. I'm, making time to pick up my kids or whatever. And I'm doing that consciously. It's almost kind of like the Spotify CEO of like, we don't hire babies, like you can work from home. Yeah. It's kind of in the same line as that.
Yeah.
And so I can see how as a CEO, you're wearing your business, you think about it 24/7, like, a lot of CEOs, kids get pushed to the side because they're constantly thinking about their business. And so I can empathize with where her head is at in that sense.
Yeah. And I think she does say, at one point, she's like, if you just want sort of like an average job, you probably don't need to work 7 days a week. But if you're really ambitious and you want to be at the leadership table, or you want to be like, you're probably going to have to work pretty hard. And I think sometimes people don't want to hear that. But
yeah,
to me, I was like, yeah, I mean, I get that. As you get more senior, you might have more autonomy over your boundaries and what you do and don't do. But you are kind of on, and the buck does stop with you. Like that is especially as a CEO. I've never been a CEO, but especially as a CEO. But even as I've got more senior, there are just realities of that, which is like, yeah, if something happens, it is you. You do need to be available. You do need to make that work. So I do understand it from that perspective. I think where I struggle with it is I do think two things. That's all well and good if you're in an environment that allows you to set those boundaries. If you're in a workplace that when you set that boundary, it's honored and people respect it, then that's different. But a lot of people work in environments where you can try and set that boundary and it will be walked all over. It will be ignored. It will not be. So I think it's easy as a CEO to say, I'm going to set my boundaries, because not many people are going to say to the CEO, well, actually, you're not allowed to do that. you know.
Yeah.
But if I'm more junior and I'm saying, hey, I really need to get going because I've got to go do this thing, or, you know, whatever it might be, I think there's a lot of workplaces that would probably not progress that person, or that person would
Mhm.
lose out on opportunities, or that would be talked about behind their back. Like, you know, I've seen that happen in different places. So I
Yeah.
think it's like quite a lovely idea that the employee is empowered and that
Yeah.
they can make their decisions. I don't think that's the reality for a lot of people. And it's certainly not the reality in environments like shift work, or, you know, like like
Yeah.
a lot of environments where that does, I mean, corporate is one thing, but so I wish she'd kind of thought through that a little bit. And then I think the other part for me is like losing this idea of work life balance. Like, I don't know if that's the right wording, right?
Mhm.
I think what is, and we think about the candidate interview scenario, because what she's saying is don't ask me about work life balance in the interview process.
Yeah.
I kind of understand that, because if it was framed as like, you know, hey, so like, how do I get my work life balance at this point? Like, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's the right way to frame it. What I think people want is flexibility, and some people not just want it, some people need flexibility, you
I
know?
agree.
So
I
maybe it's
also
about that versus
yeah,
like work life balance.
that's kind of where my head went, less about flexibility and more of a I mean, maybe a junior person isn't interviewing with the CEO, right?
Mm.
But maybe somebody who lacks the terminology, who is more curious about like what is the company culture
Culture.
like?
Mm,
That
exactly.
could be what they're asking as well. So I think
Totally.
dismissing that question um is a I mean is a bit short-sighted.
Yeah. I wish she'd just had a little bit more thoughtfulness around what are you actually saying? I think what you're saying is like, if you're interviewing for a really senior position in my leadership team and we're going to work really hard, like maybe that interview isn't the place to ask for that. But I think what she's missing is that, to your point, I think it's either two things. I think some people just really mean, what's this place like to work at? Like, you know,
Mhm.
is it a toxic environment? Is it, you know, like, and they're trying to uncover what that culture of hustle is like at that place,
Yeah.
right? That's one. I do think other people are asking or want to ask about those boundaries. Like, what does that look like? And this might be
Mhm.
someone who is a single parent, so genuinely needs some flexibility in the role.
Yeah.
You know, there are lots of people that need, who are caring for older parents, who maybe need the ability to be able to, you know, drop out if they need to and go. So I think some people genuinely need to ask that in the interview process. And as long as I think a workplace is honest about their flexibility policies, what that looks like, you know, I don't have a problem with someone asking that. I think that's something that they're trying to validate in an interview process. And that
I
might
would
mean they're not a match, or it might be
yeah.
that you are, you know. I don't have a problem. And I think just dismissing it like, you're not going to be the person for me if you ask about that. To your
Yeah.
point, they just don't have the right language, but they're trying to get to something in asking that question.
I think that's a hot tip for anybody interviewing that does want to understand a little bit more about the culture or the flexibility in the workplace. Like, be really specific about your language and how you
Yeah.
ask that.
Yeah.
Because even though I know the job market is a disaster, you also don't want to take a job that you're not going to be able to, put your heart into.
Yeah.
Like, I just think as comms people, we tend to really put our hearts into our work. Like, you've kind of got to be embedded in the business. And
Yeah.
if you start a job based on, false pretenses, then you aren't going to love it anyway. So just be
Yeah.
direct with your questions.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is like, think about who you're interviewing with. Like, often you can ask for a peer interview, a peer level interview. And
Yeah.
that's where I would be like digging in on those questions, because that's
Hmm.
your peer level. That's really someone who you can probably like. I probably wouldn't be going real hard. I mean, maybe I would. I don't know. I'm not that worried about asking those questions, but I think just think about who you're interviewing with. And if you're really trying to uncover that piece,
Yeah.
or even if you're a working parent, maybe seeing if you can interview with someone who is a working parent. That's hard to figure out, but if you could, trying to understand how they work in that environment and what that looks like can be super helpful.
Yeah.
That gives you a sense. But the other thing you can ask is genuinely, what are their flexibility policies? Like, that's
Yeah.
and ask the recruiter that. Like, don't necessarily ask
Yeah.
the CEO, but ask the recruiter. Say, like, I want to understand, how does the company treat flexibility? What does that look like? How do you request flexibility if you need it? And they
Mm-hmm.
might say, we don't have one. Well, that tells you something. Other companies will have a full policy around if you need flexibility at any given time in your life. Like, it might be over the span of your career at that company, but you're well within your rights to ask about a flexibility policy.
Yep. I also think as a manager, thinking about some of the comments that were made in that podcast around, I guess, just thinking about the kick on of having your own boundaries and setting them from a work-life balance perspective. Like, I think a lot of that is on managers and you having that relationship with your manager as well, in the sense of, when I was a people manager, if I were to be working late or on a Saturday or something, like, that's on me. Like, I'm working outside of office hours. If I'm not going to email a junior person on my team at 9 o'clock on a Saturday, with something that I just thought about. Like, send a timed email,
Yeah.
or send your email with the subject line of, like, read on Monday.
Mm.
Just having that conscious, like, effort that not only then helps people create their own boundaries with how they work with you, but also gives them permission to be able to create theirs, in return.
Yeah. I think some of it as well is, and again, I wish she'd done this on the podcast. I wish she'd talked about how she did balance that. Like, she kind of
Yeah.
referenced the fact that she had to come to terms with balancing her ambition with being a parent, and that's a hard balance. And it really is. If you're ambitious and you want to go out but then you've got stuff you need to do for the kids, and you want to be a great parent, and you want to be present at school things and da da da, that's really hard. Like, I want to hear more women telling me how they are managing it,
Yeah.
warts and all. Like, I have help here, I do this, I have a calendar app that helps me with my, like, whatever it is. And I've found in the past, just me being really vulnerable about, like, man, I'm having a bad week of balancing the kids and, like, work's winning this week,
Mhm.
and that has helped in the past in terms of, like, even if I'm not getting the boundaries right as a leader, I'm being honest about the fact that I'm not actually getting the boundaries right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wish she'd been a little bit more conscious of, like, or just a little bit more context and a little bit more thought. But again, it's a podcast. She's riffing. I don't
Yeah.
think she meant it the way it has now been, like, really teared down. That's my impression, is
Mhm.
she didn't. I think she genuinely believes that it's up to you to set your boundaries, and you've got to balance it, and you've got to figure it out. And to some extent, that's true. I just think it's easier said than done, and it's easier at a senior level.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think at a senior level, absolutely, especially now having my own consulting business, like, I'm never going to get a boundary if I don't ask for it, or if I don't,
Mm.
like, figure that out. Like, even at my consulting practice, I only take meetings on certain days of the week, because if I was taking a meeting for every single one of my clients throughout the week,
Get any work done.
I would never get any of my fucking work done,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's something that I figured out really early. So even just thinking about that from a corporate perspective, it's kind of like, how do you communicate that to your manager? Or if you're at a senior position, how do you set that example within the team?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think this idea that you will perfectly balance your work and your life, I personally don't subscribe that you can find that perfect balance. Some weeks feels like that, but for
Hmm.
the most part, I would say it is like an up and down. You know, I often say, like, one week the kids are leading, the next week work's leading, and I have to make those trade-offs constantly.
The
And
other
yeah,
the other thing that annoys me is that, like, I, work is my baby. Like, work is my child. My business is my baby. I don't have kids, and, like, that's completely my choice. I think that work-life balance for me is, like, being able to go out on walks in between meetings and, like, have some free thinking time, and,
yeah,
like, being able to go to the gym in the morning before I sit down to meetings, or being able to, like, go snowboarding if I don't have, like, if I have time in the middle of the day with Scott, like, doing stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah, that's work-life balance for me, but literally I work every single day. Like, I just don't
yeah,
think that work-life balance, especially being asked to a woman, I think is assumed of, like, how do you balance your family and your work?
totally.
Whereas like for me, I'm just like, I like to work. Work is my baby. And so like,
But also, like, everybody has the right to, like, and this is what I think is like the missing conversation is like, you don't know anything about anybody's life really in the
yeah,
behind the scenes. And so for me, it's sure it's balancing kids and family and all that sort of stuff. But just as much you have things going on in your life that you need the ability to set boundaries, prioritize, all of
hmm
that, which is why I kind of want to get to this point where we're all talking about like what we need to make our lives work, whatever
yeah,
that's like, right? And it's
yeah,
this flexibility, this boundary setting for whatever our lives look like. And some
yeah,
people it's aging parents, some people it's they need to be able to exercise because for their mental health that's really important, right?
yeah,
Like whatever it is, and some people have even more complexities. Some people have kids with disabilities that have special
yeah,
needs. Like who knows, right? And so I think
yeah,
it's like trying to figure out that, rather than this equilibrium of like balancing my work and balancing my life, it's like how do I find the right flexibility, the right model that works for me? And I just think we've got to get into this sense that those will look different for everybody. For some people, it might be one day at home. For some people, it might be, I want to spread it out over 7 days so that I can
mhm,
take 2 hours out of the day to go do something else in the middle of the day or whatever it is. And I guess I just come back to this idea of like trust in your employees,
yeah.
really clear outcomes and what their job description is and what they need to deliver. And if they're delivering that, I don't really care how they're getting that done.
Yeah.
Oh,
One thing from a PR perspective, if I were her like exec comms
yeah.
person, I think as a CEO, particularly a successful CEO that's run multiple companies in that role, she probably gets fucking asked that a lot, you know?
100.
And maybe she's tired of being asked that. And so she's
Yeah.
dismissive of it, not thinking that every interview is potentially reaching somebody that's heard of you for the first time. And so when you dismiss that question, because it gets asked a lot, that doesn't mean that Diary of a CEO listeners have all heard of this person. Like, I admittedly did not know who this woman was until you were like, we should do this hot take,
Yeah.
And so I
This
think
is your
that
first interaction with her
this
as a CEO. Yeah.
yeah, and so just thinking about that in that perspective from a comms world, she had the opportunity to really engage and like be vulnerable in that setting because that's what that podcast is. Talk
Yeah.
about I get asked this question a lot and the more I think about it, the more the response evolves.
Yeah.
I think about it as my own personal views. Here's what they are. And here's some examples of how I've done that. Like she could have
Exactly.
taken that and made it into an opportunity. I'm assuming she gets asked that a lot. And so that's why she was like, oh, not this again. But you have to remember that every interview is a new audience.
Yeah, and like in some ways it was refreshing to hear a different take on it. Because I do think we hear it a lot. I just wish when she said, I've had to figure out that balance of ambition and like I wish she'd just been like, but let me tell you what that looks like in reality.
Yeah,
Like
here's what my day looks like.
balance that ambition with, I've missed this or I chose to do this over this. And
Yeah.
that's the trade-off I made and that's okay. And as
Yeah.
women, men have been making those trade-offs forever. And by the way, probably making more to the work side. And so I
Mhm.
think the flip of this is, to your point, we need to be talking about this as non-gendered, i.e., what
Hmm.
are men doing to balance that ambition and that trade-off? How are men managing that? And a lot of men now don't want to do what their dads did. They want to
Yeah.
be more involved. And so they're struggling with the opposite, which is I don't feel like men often get permission to be setting those boundaries as much as
Mhm.
men do. And that's broken in both ways because it's like the women are expected to leave early to go to the school thing or to do the parenting thing with their age parents. But I
Yeah.
know my husband felt that he didn't have the same permissions to say, "Oh, I've got a kids' school thing," or "I've got,"
Yeah.
and even when he took 6 months parental leave with our son, a lot of people reacted very strongly with like, "Whoa, that's a long time," and he was like, "Well, it's the same as my wife's taking," but
Yeah.
it was like it was like, wow. And then he got also like the hero Oh my God, that's amazing.
Totally.
I was like, hang on, I did the first 6 months.
I gave
Whoa.
birth to the babies. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like it's just I think we've got to really relook at this whole issue
Yeah.
and just start to like think about the environment we want to create and the working environments we want to create for our
Yeah.
people, men and women and anyone on that spectrum.
Yep. I agree. I agree.
That's my hot take. There you go. You've
Oh,
heard it.
it was a good hot take. I liked it. We've got some lessons learned, we've got some takeaways, and then just a lot of venting, really.
It's a lot of venting, but Emma, if you want to come on the pod,
I
feel free, Emma Grede. If you'd like to come on this pod and talk about it in a little bit more context, you just let us know.
will guide you. We'll make you a
Yeah.
briefing document.
Yeah.
Okay, let me do my hot take. And this will be, say this is like the subject line of the hot take, but it's a question actually. So here's a question to lead you in. Would you be Elon Musk's PR person?
Do you want me to answer very honestly straight away?
Yeah, let's fucking do it.
Hard no. Hard no. But tell me more.
Okay, so many of you may have seen, I saw it in Business Insider. So I'm going to read a little bit of that article on here just for context because I think it's got some good insights. But X is now looking for a communications leader to help improve its relationship with reporters. Multiple people familiar with the matter told Business Insider just recently. So let me kind of like walk you through. One person who was contacted by a recruiter said that the remit was described as helping craft the company's public image. The job has been vacant since Dave Heidsinger, God rest his soul, he's still alive. We just, we know he went through it. Left his role as head of media strategy earlier this year, worked closely with CEO Linda, who's been trying to rebuild X's ad business. So we know that there's been some issues that have been happening with X in regards to Elon telling advertisers who stopped advertising on the platform to go fuck themselves. We know that X is suing 11 advertisers, alleging they collectively conspired to boycott the platform in antitrust laws. The case is all ongoing, but like there are things that are brewing on the advertising side. I think on the media front, X has been criticized a lot for like loosening moderation and account verification rules, reinstating some banned accounts, those types of things that we're kind of seeing come through in news headlines. I think also what's interesting is that both Linda and Elon have gone on calling traditional journalists and media, they have this phrase they call it of like legacy media, saying that it's kind of outdated, unneeded, that kind of thing as well. Even just recently, I know Linda was on either speaking at a conference on a panel or something on the 30th of April where she was saying that like they've bypassed or leapfrogged legacy media, like the new generation fueled by technology has freed information, all of data and content consumption has changed forever. So they have this perspective, which a part of me is kind of like, hot take, they're not wrong. Like I think that the go direct strategy that they're talking about without naming it that specifically is the future of kind of how we do storytelling. I think legacy media is a term for, someone that wants to take a dig at journalists.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're looking to kind of take on this communications role, or that's how they're classifying it, is really interesting because I would almost argue that they don't need maybe a traditional PR communications leader. Like maybe they just need a really banger of an ad campaign that turns around their messaging and that sort of thing as well. Because ultimately, are you going to be able to control what Elon says in the media? Sure, you can give some guardrails. Yeah, exactly. Also, you're not going to be just managing Linda. So for them to say that the job is just to like work with Linda on her presence and her language, like, no, it's going to be Elon in her other ear, So you have to think about what that role actually entails. And at the end of the day, you're like, sure, we can help craft messaging. We can guide, we can give some tough love and be there for them and give an honest opinion. But is it a comms person that they actually need?
They need a few things, I think. And I think it would be interesting, like taking a step back for a sec. I think one of the challenges at the moment for X, for Tesla, is like, how do you continue to grow the business as a business and continue to make it successful when you have a founder who is very distracted by some other things in his
Volatile almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like doing his Doge work. And I saw he was in the Middle East with the president, and so and then is quite volatile, has a lot of opinions. And so I think one of the challenges is you can't really separate these businesses from Elon, right? But they kind of need to if they want them to continue to be successful. So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I think it's a challenge for Linda as a CEO because really people think X, they think Elon.
Yep.
So I think as a comms person, potentially the role is to help elevate Linda so that they can create some separation, probably. Now, can you do that? I don't know. Maybe the right comms person could do that. I think the other thing I would be asking, and again, I don't want this role. If I was interviewing for it, I would be saying, what is the ad strategy? What is the business strategy for X long term? What is the long-term vision for this platform? Because what is the revenue model? If it is advertising, you really need to do some work then in terms of who are those advertisers? What does that look like? I think they're not wrong on where we're at from a media standpoint. I agree with the comment about legacy media. I think it's an and both kind of thing, because I think we are seeing news break on X. It creates news cycles. These CEOs and founders are having like spats on X, and then that creates a news cycle, and a lot of these founders are using X to get out their individual point of views, which is not a bad thing.
Right.
So like that is not wrong. So how do they turn that into something that is powerful, that is meaningful, and then I think for the moment, I still think you need the relationships with journalists who are on the Hill, who are writing for the traditional publications, because ultimately you're a business. So I think you also want to kind of, so I think they probably do need a comms person, but I would say they probably need a few people around the table if they're going to turn this around.
Yeah.
And maybe they have those people. I don't know. I think as a comms person, that would be a highly stressful job. I think there's almost every day something that happens on X that then creates a news cycle that then, or Elon does something on it, or they reinstate someone that's really controversial, or they have some, like I just personally would not want that challenge. And I mean, I'm also not necessarily values aligned with Elon. So I don't know much about Linda. And maybe that says something about why they need a comms person. I don't really know a lot about her. I haven't read a lot about her. Maybe she'd be great to work with. I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't be applying for it.
Yeah, I think just kind of looking through since the beginning of 2024, they've gone through 4 really stellar, credible comms people. So I think that's one signal of like the tough job that you've got laid out for you.
Yeah.
I would also say that if one thing you would really need to think about is if we're going to have Elon, no matter what he's talking about, still be a reflection of X, like, do we even let Elon just be Elon? And then what is the persona we need to build for Linda? And how do we work really, really hard on all channels for that?
Yeah. Yep. And, listen, there might be a comms person who really believes in the vision of X and the idea that legacy media is done, that this is the way we're moving forward, that Elon, I'm going to play devil's advocate. The Doge stuff, like, could there be more efficiency in government or everywhere around the world, or at least in Western countries? Yeah. Yes, definitely. Do governments spend money they don't need to spend? Yes, definitely. Are procurement processes way too long for a lot of things? Yes, definitely. So in theory, now, what what has eventuated isn't necessarily what I think is the right thing. But there may be people who really believe in that, right?
Yeah.
And who really think that that is what's needed in the US government system. I don't know. So if there is a comms person that's really aligned with that, like go for it. Go do the
Yeah.
job, because it's kind of validating that they want a comms person, I think.
Yeah.
You know, like they fired all of them a while ago and now they're back. They come crawling back.
That's what we were kind of talking about, was like, you know what? They fired all of them, or they had all of these comms people come through and then leave at their own choice, probably in some of those cases. What it does show, that since they got rid of their whole comms team and now they're asking for somebody back, is that comms people are starting to build up their reputation and have a seat at the table again, which I think is a nice signal, regardless of the company that, you know, that's doing that.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Like look, it's a win in the comms like tick box of like comms is important and can help you build your reputation.
we're doing it, guys.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Like, what a challenge. Like, interesting role. Definitely not for me. And like stress wise, values alignment, all that stuff. But there is bound to be someone who is interested in that role. Many people probably. But yeah, and I think it's a really hard gig when you've got a founder who's quite out there. I mean, you know, that's a lot of company. But
Like,
yeah.
like Ali Safalo said, like, some PR people are just founder riz detectors. Like, some people are founder whisperers.
Yep.
And I completely believe that. Like, I do think that some people are just really good at that management. It takes a special personality. Can I read you what some of the PR
Yes,
people
please do.
in the Business Insider
Are
article?
they all anonymous? Because I love that.
They're all anonymous.
Okay.
Which also, in my mind, when they're anonymous, it also means that it's like, that's PR speak for like, no fucking thank you.
Yeah. I dream of the day of being an anonymous source for Business
Oh,
Insider.
oh my God. Maybe I've been all along. Maybe this is me. No, it says people in PR circles credited X for being self-aware and trying to expand its operation, and said it would take someone with an uncommon sense of adventure to fill the role.
Oh, that's a PR way of saying you crazy.
You know what? We're such nice people, PR people. Like, we're so worried about offending a journalist or offending an executive that could be potentially a relationship down the road, that like no one's going to be like, no fucking way, put my name on it.
Yeah. 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 They're like, that person's going to need an uncommon sense of adventure. Sure.
Like, okay. So then it ends with a quote that says, "It certainly would be the challenge of a lifetime," one said. And I'm just like, that's also PR speak for not me, mate.
No thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Challenge of a lifetime. Yeah. But I mean, hey, I watch very keenly to see who takes that role.
I'm going to be pumped for them, because it means that they truly wanted it. Like, that's great. Whoever that is.
And there are a lot of people who would want that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a challenge. Like, I don't say that lightly. I think it's a really challenging role. If someone is ready to sink their teeth into something like that, then all power to them, and I wish them a lot of luck and success. It's not about shooting that person down for going for that role. I think that's a really ambitious thing to do, and go for it. But it is not for me.
I also wonder if
it's not for me. It's like they probably don't want me either.
I feel like
it would not for us.
They're like, no, it's a no from me too. Don't worry.
Yeah.
My gosh, what would it take? Like, if they were like,
nothing.
Katie Devasey, join us.
Me for saying this, he'd be like, it would take money. I'm like, no.
I think that's what most people would say.
No, I would nothing. I don't have an interest in that. Like, as in, well, and it also for me, it would mean moving countries, which I'm not going to do. I love where I live, but like, even to work for them here, like, let's just flip it and say it was, no.
It's a hard no.
A hard no. Maybe if Elon wasn't around.
You want him?
Like if it was just X and Elon had kind of exited and they were in a new rebrand and they were like, we've separated from Elon and we are now our own social media and this is our vision and this is the platform, this is what we want to go after and we think we can be the next whatever. Maybe, because I think that's interesting. But I'm trying to figure out, I'm doing the PR thing.
You can just say no.
Zero uncommon sense of adventure. So no.
That's true. I can vouch for
That's
that.
not me. That's not. I read that job description and I go, yeah, nah. You haven't said. Would you do it? What would it take for you to do it? What about if the person who then gets hired is like, hey, Boyson, come in and help me with Linda?
It would have to be somebody that I fucking loved and really trusted.
Yeah.
Really trusted, that would have my back when I wasn't in the room, that kind of thing. That's what that would need to be happening for me.
And actually, that's a good point. Like, if the person that got appointed into that role was someone that I deeply respected, that I thought was like really going to change things, then I would consider working for them under them. But no, I don't have any desire to apply for that role.
Anyway, those are our hot takes.
Loved it.
Loved it.
Good hot take.
All right. Well, if you have a hot take you want us to do, you can email us, or you can message us on Instagram. Our email is hello@smartandpublicpod.com, and we're on Smart and Public Pod on Instagram and TikTok. So reach out to us, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff, and then we'll talk to you guys later.
See you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.